What's the number one challenge for businesses today?
Workforce development, attracting, recruiting, and retaining people.
And that's why we created this podcast, designed for the frustrated CEO, the under-resourced recruiter, or the overworked manager, to give you the tools to tackle those WTF moments.
It's time to open another Workforce Therapy File. Welcome back to Workforce Therapy Files, Season 2.
Season 2.
I'm not singing episode 17.
Yes, Molly, I'm excited to be back in the studio.
Me too.
It has been way too long. And today, I'm excited.
Why are you excited, Jamie?
Because one of my favorite people, who has been one of my favorite people for like 14 years, I think we added that up. I don't know, that math is starting to feel rude. But 14 years ago, we met, right?
Yep, that's right. I think, it was right at like 14.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to have Tiffany Nugent join us today in the studio.
And Tiffany, where are you from?
So I live here in Louisville, and I work all over the country.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Are you originally from Louisville?
I'm not. I moved here 17 years ago, 3 years before we met.
There you go.
Yeah, I was a transplant back then.
So then we won't ask you where you went to high school, because I feel like that's what automatically happens.
You won't know it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So before we got on here, we were talking about icks. You know, I've got one because today we are talking about wellness and leadership and wellness.
Right.
So I've got one for you. What do you think when people say FMLA or FMLA? I'm just curious what that does for you.
There is like a visceral response in my core.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because as an HR practitioner for over 20 years that I just call it FMLA. But FMLA is the thing that gets me. It's
Ick.
like nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
I
one of my
don't
favorite.
understand. What?
Yeah. So the Family Medical Leave Act,
FMLA?
people say FMLA. I'm just here to tell you, if you get nothing else from today, that ain't it.
That's a new one.
Don't say FMLA.
Or FAMLA. I feel like FAMLA would at least be a little more accurate than FMLA. Anyway, not
It's just
entirely
FMLA,
while we're here.
people. Just FMLA.
It's just FMLA. Like,
4
let's make an
letters.
acronym an acronym.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Keep it
I
that
just,
way.
I just shorten it to leave of absence.
Yeah.
Just take a leave of absence.
Oh, yeah.
Let's apply for a leave
Also
of absence.
known as LOA.
They're on a leave of absence.
See,
Because
another acronym.
when you support the whole United States, it can be a multitude of types of leaves. It's
Oh,
not
yeah.
always just FMLA.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Didn't even think about that.
See, but it's definitely not FMLA. Okay. So I'm excited.
what are we
because
talking about?
We're talking about wellness, and we're talking about leadership as it relates to wellness. And there's so many things that go into creating a wellness-focused organization. And Tiffany, why don't you give us a little bit of a bio, right? Help us understand why our listeners should see you as a really credible source on this topic.
Awesome. Well, I've been in HR for over 20 years. I've worked in all sorts of industries, retail, manufacturing, fulfillment, but I've been in the last 10 years in healthcare and healthcare technology. And I led a large healthcare organization through COVID, through rapid growth before COVID. And then I moved to healthcare technology, where we rapidly grew, doubled in size year over year. And then we ultimately had to close down. And I now work in healthcare, in mental health care, in the virtual mental health care space. And I also am the owner of the Louisville Salt Cave and Salt Wellness, which are brick and mortar wellness facilities. And we partner with organizations on how to bring wellness into the workplace.
Wow. That's incredible.
Nice.
Thanks.
So this is definitely your jam.
It is my jam. And I didn't know it was my jam 10 years ago, but being in healthcare and seeing the effects of everything that's happened in the last 10 years on the workforce and how it has become increasingly harder to lead people well, I realized what was missing is the focus on wellness in the workplace, because you can't lead well unless you have a well workplace, because that's the most important thing that you can do.
Yes. And it's, well, we won't get into that yet.
We can get it.
It's awful. Wellness is awful, and it is not, it doesn't, leadership within organizations do not focus on that. And I believe that a lot of it has to do with the reactive mentality of how we've had to work the last 4 years, and we have not made a shift back to what is it? Slow down to speed up. Mm-hmm. We're going to get into that, though.
Yes.
I'm getting ahead of myself. I do that. Sorry, Tiffany.
I also think sometimes leadership underestimate their impact on the well-being of others. They think it's something quick. They think it's a feedback moment. I'm giving you an idea or a thought. And sometimes people sit on those moments of feedback for years, right? I like to tell leaders, don't start a spark because you have no idea the forest fire that you might be
That's right.
creating, right? So let's talk a little bit about that because one of the things that I know that you've been part of is really being intentional about how organizations support wellness, especially in moments where resilience, adaptability, and culture have to be at the forefront. So tell us a little bit about a scenario where you had to focus on those things and how you believe HR best showed up for that.
Yeah, so leading through COVID, it really started to spark my understanding of an organization's responsibility to support their leaders so their leaders can support their employees. As we all know, HR is one of the more under-resourced teams in most organizations because it's not always viewed as revenue producing. So, but alternatively, leadership is looking to HR to lead the culture and drive wellness. But I always say it's not my responsibility to lead wellness. It's not HR's responsibility. It's my responsibility to give our leaders the tools necessary to lead wellness and create a healthy workforce because they are the front line with our employees. They are eyes and ears to the organization. I can't be everywhere. Our CEO can't be everywhere. Your executive team, we have moments, and that's when we can lead. But it's our responsibility to lead our leaders well so they can lead the people. And so it was during the time through COVID when I would have leaders reach out, what do I do? How do I support these people? We have, people that are losing family members and losing themselves. And my response is, you're a leader. Let's be a human first. Let's support them through this and understanding that we still have a job to do. We still have to get the work done. But people are only going to do that and they're only going to show up for you if you can support their whole self. And that means providing that psychological safety in the workplace, providing them space and understanding, and accepting people where they are, meaning you don't have to always give feedback in the moment. Maybe it's time to pause before you give that feedback and say, what's going on in this person's life?
Yeah.
Maybe they have something outside of work that's affecting the way they're showing up. And then if you pause and you think through it, you can then go back and give more meaningful feedback that maybe doesn't sit with someone for a decade or doesn't ignite a forest fire, as you just said, Jamie.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I read a coaching book one time that said feedback starts with a question of whether or not it's a good time. Mm-hmm. And, oh, whoa, that's a consideration step I haven't seen,
And I think a lot of it, too, is I think leaders need to be told what wellness means. It's not about the cafeteria in the space. It's not about
the pool.
No,
The playing pool in
the
break
gym.
room. I do like
it's-
air hockey, but I don't
it's
know that
fun.
it helps.
It's a stress reliever to a point.
Yeah, for a
with
second.
The puck thing,
It flies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's aggressive.
It is.
You can get some
It
stuff
is.
out.
I mean,
Absolutely.
but it is.
Right. And it's a great game.
For
no
sure.
judgment. However, that's not well-being. You all of the variables of a human, a personal, professional, history, what have they overcome over the years? I'm not saying that leaders have to become therapists or encourage that. I'm not saying that. But you have to take the whole person into consideration, especially once you get into the positions where people are leading others. You can't not.
Or no.
There's just frontline workers, the mid-level managers and down, that group and demographic within any organization, you have to be mindful as leading that group of folks. You've got young folks, you've got folks that are maybe in a second career. the well-being of that human is all of their environment.
And
I'm sorry, I got on a soapbox
No,
there for
I
a minute.
think it's fair though, Molly, because I think there's a lot of just small nuggets that take wellness in the workplace a really long way.
Yes.
So things like assuming pure intentions. So at least start by
Right.
assuming the person's not an idiot. At least start by assuming they wanted it to work out well, because you're going to get a lot more information that way than just hammering somebody, right?
Yeah.
So you've worked in places that were feedback rich.
Yes.
I'd love to hear what that means to you.
Yeah. So I think that's a sign of a healthy workplace in most environments, because foundationally, if you think about wellness in the workplace, there has to be first table stakes, psychological safety to speak up. Because if people don't feel safe to speak up, that's when you know you have an unhealthy workplace. And, Molly, your point of all those great, awesome things are cool. And there was this big sweeping trend that was wellness in the workplace.
That's right.
What we saw was that actually it just masked problems.
Exactly.
It put a Band-Aid on things. It didn't get to the root of it. And feedback-rich cultures are great because, and what I mean by that is if your employees are safe speaking up, raising the flag and saying, this is a problem, but you look at your scores and 90% of your workforce says, hey, I plan to be here in a year. You put those two together, and that tells me that people feel safe here, but they are just really passionate about making this the best place. And the way that shows up is I have the tools and resources necessary to do my job. I would refer people to come work here because this is a great place to work. Those are signs of a healthy culture. But what's not a sign of a healthy culture is just feedback for the sake of feedback. So a leader sees someone that makes a very small mistake. Instead of assuming positive intent that they weren't aware, you drive into that feedback all well-intentioned, but your well-intention is going to cause you problem down the line because you didn't slow down for a second, pause, and think through what that feedback's impact would have overall on your team.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the ripple effect of what that can do and will do is just people don't get enough credit. You seriously have to stop. And I am a person that thinks out loud, which is very dangerous. I have to be mindful of those that I'm around or the room that I'm in to allow myself that freedom to do that. Because as a person in a position of leadership, people hear things and take what they filter out and run. And oftentimes it's just the idea of something still. It's not an ideal. It's an idea
Very good.
of something.
I like the grammar correction there,
Thank
too.
you.
That was good.
Did you? I like it too. But when you think about being a feedback-rich culture, to really deep dive into that with you, Tiffany, one of the things that we do with Incipio is employee surveys and learning that feedback and helping leaders understand that you only had 20% of your team give you information on this survey. That's not good.
Right.
And then why isn't that good? We got 20%. I'm like, what about the other 80? Where are they? What are they thinking? Have they already left?
I can tell you what they're thinking. They're thinking the survey's not going to make a difference.
Right. They're not.
That's
gonna do
what
it.
happens when
Yeah.
80% don't respond.
Exactly. Or it's a situation where they just don't care. This is a
Absolutely.
stopgap for them. They don't see the value in the culture. They don't see the value in the organization. They don't see this as a place for them to stay. It's a stepping stone.
That's right.
But one of the big things for me is, why are we asking people when they leave in an exit interview what their experience was like, and once a year in an employee engagement survey? Why are those the two things at a point in which with the exit survey, why are we even asking?
Well, I think
They're done then.
absolutely. And I think it has to start from a place of you genuinely have to care about these results
Yes.
in
and
order
do
for them to
something.
even matter.
Yeah.
There are companies that I've worked with that I'm like, why are you asking this question on your survey? Because if you wouldn't actually do anything about it, don't ask it.
Yes.
Because I think asking a question you wouldn't do anything about is about a bazillion times worse. You know, seeking somebody's feedback and not actually caring about it.
Well,
Not
that's how
wanting the answer.
That's how you degrade trust in the organization.
Absolutely.
And it's curious. This is a really interesting point. I've seen organizations that I've come into and they'll be like, hey, we ask, we do engagement surveys, pulse surveys monthly, or we do engagement surveys quarterly. And then I look at the history and they've asked different questions every time. Well, it doesn't give you any data. It doesn't help you understand where your problems are. And so the first thing I always recommend is great, we've got a cadence of it. Now let's create consistency, and then let's measure that consistency over a trend of time. And then let's create some real meaningful feedback and action planning. And then the step that a lot of people forget and a lot of organizations forget is then go tell them what you're doing, right?
Yes.
And so it's hey, not only are we going to collect your feedback, but then we're going to go do something with it. And these are the things that we were able to improve. And also be transparent and honest about what you're not going to do. I can't impact this right now.
Yeah, we're not remodeling the break room. I'm
Right.
sorry that there's not enough space right now.
Absolutely. And it's the same, it's the same for benefits. Every company sends out benefit surveys.
Yes.
And then your benefits either get worse or don't change or aren't aligned with your workforce. And so one of the things I've tried to do in my career, especially in the last 10 years when I've had impact on benefits, take that survey data and I say, all right, what are we paying for that no one cares about? Let's get rid of that.
Right.
And what are the things that we aren't paying for that people want? Because you can use that. Right now, compensation is such a hot topic, and I don't want to go into that. Everyone always asks me about that. But what you can do is create a total rewards philosophy that doesn't just rely on compensation, because you give people the things that they need to support their life in their life cycle and their families. We've got multiple generations in the workforce. You can't just throw something out there and say, oh, this is good for well-being, but it totally forgets 3/4 of the people that are working for you. And it might hit your older generations and not your younger, or your younger generations and not your older. And so I think it's really important that we have an opportunity to, I went down a rabbit hole here with the feedback, but
We do it every episode.
Yeah,
Go right ahead. Go where you
We're
want
on
to
the
go.
ride.
That's right.
This is why it's so, if you want to know how to create wellness in your workplace, I always just say, ask, and then listen. And, it's one thing to ask, but it's another thing to actually hear and listen and create action plans around what people are telling you.
Absolutely. And sometimes I feel like organizations put together initiatives because they've heard it's a good idea. They haven't figured out their so that we're going to do this so that we influence productivity, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some strategies you've seen that help show that appropriate prioritization of well-being without sacrificing business outcomes, without sacrificing productivity?
Yeah, this is interesting. I've worked in a remote first environment for the last couple years, and this has become even more critical for remote first organizations or hybrid organizations. I found that fundamentally, if you don't prioritize the well-being of your workplace, you don't get productivity, because that's when you see high absenteeism. You see higher rates of people taking leave of absence because their mental well-being is so poor. It could be external factors or internal, that even coming to work is hard. And so when leaders look at their employees as human beings first and understand what's going on in their life, this isn't a free pass to just take off at every little minor inconvenience, but it's ask a question. Start with the assume positive intent and understand how we can support and help. There was a situation recently that I worked through where we had a large cohort of leaders in the organization raising their hand and saying, we're overwhelmed and we're stressed. And the way that was showing up was cattiness, infighting, all of those
Finger
things,
pointing,
right?
yeah.
And so the executive team went on a listening tour. And at the end of that listening tour, I asked a question. Hey, have we looked at what we're asking them to do? Are we putting too much on their plate and not giving them the tools to be successful? Because all these other things are symptoms of a deeper problem. And if we can get to the underneath and root and support them and their whole self, and that means making sure they have time to take their vacation. It's supporting them when they say, hey, I'm raising a flag. It's getting them help. It's training them. It's helping them field those questions from their employees and those bad experiences and coaching them through it. But it's also making sure that we're not scheduling them to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. No one can do that in perpetuity. You can do that for a short stint or a project, but if you schedule people that much, they're going to burn out. And when they burn out, they aren't going to show up for you. And then you're going to have turnover and you're going to lose productivity. So it's fundamental to ensuring that you have high productivity.
My mom always says you can't pour from an empty cup,
Yes.
right? So when you think about leaders and the impact that they have on others, then you have to make sure that they're cared for and managing their span of control, what they're responsible for, the clogs in the pipeline, if you will.
Yeah.
Absolutely are ways to influence positive culture.
Yeah. And I'll throw onto that, Jamie, that another thing that goes along with that is understanding the weight that you carry as a leader
That's right.
and the shadow that you cast. And that kind of goes back to our earlier feedback rich cultures.
Yeah.
That so often I have to coach very well-meaning, very well-intended, high-level leaders to say, hey, I know you want to help and your intentions are great, but you have to remember the weight of the words that you carry. And just sometimes being there is scary because in a culture where people are burned out, if, hey, I'm the top HR person and I show up to a meeting, it scares people. And so we have to do better as leaders to humanize ourselves and also just be self-aware and reflect on the shadow that we cast and the weight that we carry in the organization, because that really drives that fundamental psychological safety.
Yeah.
You should know that if you get Molly to say that's right, that is like her equivalent of amen. You should know that. Like, go back and listen to episodes and you'll hear the moments where that's right comes out and you're like, oh, she was feeling that. She was feeling that.
It's true. Yeah. How observant of you to recognize that, Jamie.
Oh, I love it.
That's good.
When I get a that's right from Molly, it's like dopamine hit.
So when we talk about well-being in the workplace, productivity, the emotion that comes from a role that we have and the impact that we make, regardless of where you are in an organization, how do we make it a first priority that not only are we looking for the culture and environment of an organization, building that reward structure that makes sense for those individuals, but there's still a job to get done, right? So everything can't be in quadrant one. How do we do better? How do we make prioritizing something real and not a 9-box on a board?
So first of all, Molly, I hate the 9-box. As an HR professional, I think it's archaic and it just assumes that there are things in place fundamentally, foundationally in an organization that often aren't the case. And maybe for some well-established organizations, it may be true, but I tend to work with a lot of startup, organizations or high growth. And you can't start with the 9-box. You got to start with training your leaders on how to be good people leaders. You may be good at XYZ. You may be great at building widgets. And so often organizations make the mistake of just promoting their best employees up to leadership. And it's like throwing them in the deep end of the pool, but they don't know how to swim. And so that's the organization's responsibility. And so that's how I would recommend organizations approach this is look at how we set our leaders up for success. Are we setting minimum expectations of what it means to be a leader? Are we telling them what their competencies are? We may know in our head, or we may be like, oh, this is a great leader. And when we interview for leaders, we're like, these are the things we want to check off. But if we actually told our leaders that that's what we're expecting of them, I'm going to guess in most cases we haven't. That's how you prioritize wellness in the workplace. But you also create space. A great example of this, I did this exercise with the executive team that I work on a couple weeks ago, is we spent a few hours in a very busy time. No one wanted to do it, but afterwards they're like, oh man, this is great. We got to do this all the time. Like now this is the action. Let's look at a reflection of what we've done. What can we learn from it? What should we continue doing? What should we stop doing because it's not working? And then take those lessons into planning for the next year or the next quarter. And you have to do that on a regular basis and invest in yourself. But I also, that's one of the reasons I started Salt Wellness is because I wanted a space for people to get away from work and the chaos of work and find a place to connect with each other. We do corporate events and leadership trainings and all of those things for organizations. And we've seen a huge uptick of organizations doing team buildings at the Salt Cave, because if you don't...
What does that look like?
Oh, it's great. We've got a lot of options, but they can rent out our whole lobby. They can bring food in. I can work with them.
I have to pause you, Tiffany. I have to pause you because in my head, here's what the Salt Cave is. Because I've never done it. I've never done it yet. I haven't done it yet. But in my mind, I am in my bathing suit, floating around in a water in a cave. I don't even know if is that real? That's not real?
No. You can do that at a float tank. We do not. We do
This is
all
what's in my
dry
head.
therapy. All dry therapy. So it's a hand-built cave. Okay. It's been around for 9 years. I've owned it since July. And it is 5 tons of Himalayan salt. And you sit in there and we play mindfulness music and you can meditate for 45 minutes or however long you want. But the real benefits, there's a physical benefit to it as well. We have a halo generator. It grinds up salt in the air, it aerosols it, and it helps reduce all the toxins in your body. It helps dry up your sinuses. It relieves some of the inflammation in your lungs and break up your mucus.
What?
Yeah. So it's great as a physical benefit and a mental benefit.
So tell me how many people in a team can go into this cave of wonders?
So we can fit up to 9 people in the cave.
Okay.
And so what we've done for larger groups is we can rotate. So we'll do like a team building event in the lobby, and then we'll have a few people in the cave, and then we'll rotate out. And then we've got a few other things that we can facilitate. I can work with organizations on that, but I also will partner with people, like bring someone in and say, hey, they need a team building on XYZ is where they're struggling, and we can connect them with those resources.
Look at you merging 2 loves.
Right?
I love everything about this. That's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it as a team building. I was reading, obviously not enough, about what the Salt Cave was. So thank you for sharing that with you. How can people find you?
We are on saltwellnessky.com. You can find us online. But yeah, it's why I did it, is because I've seen and I worked with organizations, and I wanted to do something to help people, organizations that I wasn't specifically working with.
Yeah.
I wanted to give them an option and a place to go.
Absolutely. So we're going to drop the link to your website in our show notes, along with our contact information. Yeah. Although people know how to get us, right?
I think so.
I think so.
I mean,
we're famous now,
right? It's Molly and Jamie.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and
Jason's not here for this recording. He's fine, well, all good. We hate that he's not here to kick us off again for the second season, but he'll be back for the next episode. So sorry, Tiffany, you didn't get the pleasure.
I'm sad.
Jason.
Yeah. No, he's a wonder to behold for sure.
That's right.
That's right.
So, okay. So as we're wrapping up to close, a couple of things that I've written down, and I want to make sure that we revisit them, because I really see 2025 as the year where people have to make the change. One of the big things is that we've talked about, and you've said, is that slow down to speed up. We have been just a community at large of reaction for the last 4 years.
If not longer.
Oh yeah.
But I hear
especially,
you. But especially the last 4
that.
years, we have to stop. Yeah. We have to. No more Band-Aids. No more how fast can we go, and just continue to leave things behind that we don't see value in, that obviously we're leaving on the table that we shouldn't be. It has to be a focus.
Yeah.
And I think with the intentionality of what you're talking about here today, the well-being within the workplace, the benefits, personal and professional, we have to stop and acknowledge them. Because if we don't, it's only going to get worse. And that's what's really scary to me.
I agree. Number one problem that organizations are going to see is turnover, high turnover. And we're seeing it now. People are tired. We have people quitting careers that they've built their whole life because they want to do something else because they're burnt out. So if organizations do not do something intentional to slow down, stop the change fatigue, stop putting Band-Aids on things, because then you're going to whack-a-mole, right? You put a Band-Aid here, you got another problem popping up over here. If we don't get down to the root of it and we fundamentally fix the foundation of why employees are burning out and not trusting us, we're never going to fix the turnover problem. You're not going to be able to grow. You're not going to be able to scale. And you'll see, unfortunately, good companies not make it because they didn't put the right things first.
Absolutely. Solve tomorrow's problems. Don't just react to the ones that are presented today.
Please make it stop. Make it stop.
Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait for you to hear your episode and all the amazing thoughts that have come out of your head today. And I know our listeners are really going to love it.
Yes.
So thank you very much for being part of this.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
All right, Jim. Close that file.
Thanks for listening to the Workforce Therapy Files. We hope you learned something new, and we're thankful for the time that you spent with us today. If there's a topic you'd like us to discuss, reach out to us. Our contact information is listed in the show notes. Until next time, keep your head up.